which was Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. And the difference was, whereas Frank and Joe had some like speedboats and hot rods and stuff like that. You had with the Three Investigators these guys who were like us, like everyday guys. They had backyard, in forts and stuff like that. So it seemed a little more realistic, as a story, and that made me want to write stuff like that even more. Your face just froze on my screen, by the way.
Yeah, I figured out that I can actually mute you guys as mics, and so I'm figuring out who has the audio that's doing the feedback, and so I'm going to just kind of monitor the mics that way, and that way it'll keep the screens a little bit more stable here. So John Rector, how about you? What was the first moment like that you kind of put it together? Hey, this is something that people can do for a living as a career, being a writer.
For a living, I always knew people could do it for a living if they got really lucky. I didn't know that I could do it for a living until I started doing it for a living. I think with me, I met a couple writers early. Sean Doolittle, for instance, was the first professional writer I met, and he just the experience, just meeting him and seeing somebody who was actually working in the field and doing it was probably the most eye-opening thing for me, because I didn't know any writers beforehand. I didn't even start writing until I was 30, so I kind of came to it late. Books were always kind of something that other people did and other people wrote, so that's when it came to me.
Sure. How about you, Steve?
I would hate to do writing for a living. Good Lord. I was at the NoirCon, and every I guess 5 minutes out of every 6 or 7 hours, I would see John Rector poke his head out of his hotel room and then run back upstairs and say, I got to work on edits. I got to work on edits, because he's a real writer. I would hate to do that. That would drive me crazy. What a pain in the butt that would be.
He's lying. He's really watching porn.
And Mr. Shaw, how about yourself?
I mean, when I didn't really think about it when I made the transition to writing fiction. I mean, I've only been writing fiction for about 4 years. I mean, it's a new. I feel like I'm kind of learning in public on that one. Screenwriting, there was always, even though I approached it like like a job, it still felt like there was a lottery element to it, like that you knew that one sale of a screenplay could ultimately, that became your job. Like you could make. I mean, the film industry has stupid money. If I was living in LA and it seemed like it was viable. I knew people, and then obviously I knew people at UCLA that they're huge. They're big careers, and so it was there. But I was always just drawn to doing the things that I like doing. I mean, my plan when I moved to Portland was to switch from being a screenwriter to a novelist, which is the stupidest plan you could possibly have. And then, hey, I'm just a lucky dude, it actually worked without much, it wasn't it worked pretty fluidly. I put the work in. I mean, I write every day. I have a lot of respect for what I do, but it's a tough go. I mean, I don't know. I'll tell you, when I become a professional writer, I mean, I've had periods of time in my life where that's all I did, and I actually prefer doing other things. It's why I opened the bookstore. It's why I did other things. While I just don't write that much during the course of the day. I don't know what else I would do with the rest of my day.
Let's talk a little bit about the bookstore. So how did owning and operating, a brick-and-mortar store kind of change your views or affect your views of the people who read books?
Oh, I don't know. It was interesting. It was, I don't know why I did. I mean, between the time I thought of opening a store and like opening the doors, it was probably about a 3 or 4 month period. I kind of do things kind of slapdash, and opening a bookstore in Los Angeles was kind of a bonehead move, but not a big reading town. But I don't know. I think it helped me. I wasn't writing fiction at all then. I was still a screenwriter. I had written I actually wrote a couple movies while I was working at the store, and so it was something I did. I was kind of burnt out. I had just had a play up, and I had just finished on a film, and I just didn't want to write for a while. I need something to do with my time, so that's the kind of stuff I do. I just open a bookstore. And the customers were interesting. It was fun. I don't know if it informed anything, though. It was a used bookstore. I had mostly cookbooks and crime novels. I still operate. I still have 30,000 books in my basement. I mean, I have an insane kind of, and that's beyond my personal collection of pulp and all that stuff. I grew up in a house full of books, and so I can't imagine not being around books all the time. So it seemed like a natural fit for me.
Do you remember the kinds of writers you were reading when you first opened the bookstore?
Who I was reading? I've always, even though I didn't even write, I was a comedy writer as a screenwriter. I always read crime fiction. I was a big fan of, my dad was a big crime fiction reader, so I read a lot of, I'd read all of, there's much Crumley and Williford. I'm a huge Jonathan Latimer fan, who's kind of a forgotten guy, because he was the first hard-boiled guy that was funny that I read, that was able to combine both hard-boiled and humor fluidly. And so, I was just talking to someone on Facebook. Someone had talked about Frank Stallone, and he was a regular in my bookstore. That guy knows a hell of a lot about hard-boiled crime fiction. I got my copy of Trigger Mortis by, I think, Henry Kane or Frank Kane, one of those guys from him. That Trigger Mortis is a title that should be reused. But yeah, being around books, I don't pick up the obscure thing as much as I did then. Something would just come across the table, across the counter, and you just read it for the hell of it. My reading time is so focused now. There are very few surprises in what I read. And that's what changes when you start writing, and you're part of this community. You start reading your friends' stuff. You start reading. God, I haven't read something published before 1980 in a year, I think.
Let's talk a little bit about writing communities. As you guys may or may not know, I'm chairing VoucherCon 2015, so I've really gotten personally invested in obviously that community. But we've all been to a lot of writer conventions. You mentioned, I think it was NORCon earlier, Johnny. What was your first writer convention experience like? And then maybe I'll toss that over to John Rector.
That would have been the Indianapolis VoucherCon, I think in 2009. I didn't want to go to any conventions until I had a book deal, so I had the tour deal at the time, and only thing I remember about that convention was sitting in a taxi cab with Neil and bitching about everything with him. And I don't remember what we were upset about, but it doesn't take much with the two of us. And the German bar, it was an eye-opening experience. One thing that was surprising to me about just becoming a published writer is for years before that, writing short stories and being in online writing groups and things like that, it's the goal to get a book published by a New York house. And then once you do, and you go to that community and you look around and you notice that everyone has a book published by a New York house, and instead of really reaching this other plateau, you've basically just been given a ticket to the dance, and you're really not all that special in that community as far as that goes. And I remember that was kind of a sort of a slap in the face of just how hard it is. Even when you get up to that level, it's just the beginning of the climb, and so it was an end to my naivete about what publishing is and what it isn't. In a good way, but still it's a change.
And how about you, Neil?
Actually, my first was VoucherCon 2001 in Washington, D.C., which was about 2 months after 9/11. And so we weren't even sure the airport would be open at the time. I think it opened a week before I was scheduled to fly in. And it was neat at first. It seems like, even though I'm not a New York published guy, because they all hate me, back then I was a barely published guy. I just had Plasma Guns and some short stories. But each VoucherCon, after that seemed to take up more and more time with panels, because they must have the What is Noir panel every year, because they seem to forget. But 2001 was really interesting. I remember Victor and I had planned to go. We didn't know what we were going to do. So we got there. We hung out at the hotel bar, which is, of course, the first place Victor goes in any hotel he arrives at. And just drew everyone over to us. Vicki Hendricks, I saw her come in the door, and I'd only met her online, and I said, "Hey, Vicki, come over here." And then Michael Connolly ended up sitting right next to us, and several other friends. And it was where all of the bravado from my online persona for Plasma Guns actually came to life. It was all these people that I had approached by email saying, "Would you write me a story for free?" And they did. Are actually standing in front of me. So in that case, these were really exciting, because that's the first time I met Sean Doolittle, who's now one of my closest friends, and Victor and him and I, we pretty much bitched about everything then. We've been bitching about everything since then, all the way up to that 2009 VoucherCon, which I think is the last VoucherCon I've been to. There's good and there's bad, but when I think back to that one, I just remember mostly good.
And Steve, how about you? What was your first writers' convention experience like?
Well, I didn't know that we were doing glasses tonight, by the way. So, okay. The only one I think that technically that I've been to is NoirCon, and Neil was there, and John Rector was there, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there, and your little dog. And I sat in a bar and listened to my agent and John Rector talk about what a great writer Owen Laukkanen was. So I'm not going back. John Rector can back me up on this. That was basically 2 hours about how great Owen Laukkanen was. Talented and handsome and Canadian. So I don't need that. That doesn't help me. So I'm not going back. I might come to VoucherCon when it's in the Carolinas. But no, it was nice. It was nice. Even though I met Neil, it was nice to kind of get to meet a lot of people. And I think different than John's experience with the VoucherCon, talk about how you get there and you see all these people. And you think, everybody, there's so many, maybe it's not as unique or special. And I understand that, but it was great for me to see all these people who are like in my tribe, and that you could build that community with. So that aspect of it was great. I'm not a big fan of sitting in the first floor of hotel rooms in uncomfortable chairs for an hour and a half listening to people talk about our ebooks going to take over the world, the panels and things like that. But no offense to anybody who's on any panels, but to me the great thing was the community and hanging out in the bars and the taxi cabs, and once we got to the correct Mummers Museum, it was a fine time had by all.
I wish the first one had been open, though. That was the Mummers Medical Oddities Museum that we mistakenly went to.
And maybe Mr. Shaw, so what was your first writers' convention experience, and what was that like? And now that we've heard several people, I'm thinking too, you meet all these people, like Neil said, that you chatted with online, maybe some emails with. Does it change your own identity at all? Do you view yourself as more a part of this community when you meet these people, face to face?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me, I went to BoucherCon the day after my first book came out. Like, my book came out on Tuesday, and then I flew to BoucherCon in St. Louis on Wednesday. And I went the day before. I didn't know anybody. I think I had emailed John Rector once or twice asking him about Amazon publishing, and I knew Bill Cameron because we were in the same city. But Jed Ayers had reviewed my book, and he invited me to come to Noir at the Bar in St. Louis the day before. And so yeah, I went to the day before. I didn't know anybody. I knew Jed, and then by the end of that night, I knew everybody. I got hammered and had a great time, and everyone was just cool. And over the course of that BoucherCon, I just met a lot of cool people, and it really felt like a community. It didn't really, it was just everyone wanted. People that just had a few short stories, people that had a ton of books. Everyone I met was cool, and it really, I really like going back,
Let me do a roundup once again as we're about halfway through the show here. So tonight we have John Rector on, who is the author of The Cold Kiss, Already Gone, and most recently Out of the Black. We also have Steve Weddle, who is the author of Country Hardball, which I've started reading. It's great, rural noir, literary fiction, I would even call it. It's heady stuff. Intense. Also, Anthony Neal Smith, who's the author of All the Young Warriors, Hogdoggin', which we should ask Neil about the film adaptation of that, definitely. And he's also the publisher of Plots with Guns. And Johnny Shaw, who was just speaking, who is the author of A Big Maria, Dove Season, and the new novel, Johnny, is, what's the title there?
The new novel is Plaster City. It's the second Jimmy Veeder fiasco, so it's the follow-up to Dove Season. Comes out in April of next year. Plaster City.
Plaster City.
Wherever books are sold.
So let's see questions here. Oh yeah, sort of the big question. What do you see as the role of fiction? What is the role of the fiction writer in society as you see it? John, what would you say to that?
I don't know what I think about that. I mean, I want to say, nowadays it's a deeper form of entertainment. It's a much more involving form of entertainment. In that, I don't know how to put it. It's a deeper form of entertainment because of the involvement involved in it. You get TV is a passive form of entertainment. Movies are a passive form of entertainment. With books, with fiction especially, it's like you learn the truth is in there, but it's told through a lie, I guess, is the best way. But but you're more involved in discovering it. It takes place in your imagination, things like that.
Right. But also for you, John, you see fiction writing primarily as entertainment, but at the same time, reading your work, there's definitely a blue collar, working class, message at work there. I mean, these are not highbrow, urban, romantic comedies that you're writing. There's something about the people whose lives you're wanting to tell that matters to you. That particular population obviously matters to you. Is it that they're underrepresented in society? Is it people that you're just interested in? What would you say?
It's people that I'm interested in. Plus, with the kind of fiction I write, it's a lot easier when you're writing about a working class person who might not have financial resources to get out of the problems I put them in. It helps the plot. It helps the stories you're trying to tell. Plus, that's a lot of people right now too. I mean, And it's the kind of people I come from. It's how I've grown up. It's the people I've always known. So I guess I could write about doctors and country club people, but it wouldn't be realistic because I don't know those people. If that makes sense. That's why I go for those.
Let me toss it over to Neil on that. So, I mean, you teach this stuff day in and day out. You know, you thought a lot about this. I mean, it's what you've made your sort of built your life around, right? What would you say, you know, to somebody who asks, what is the role of the fiction writer in our culture or society?
You know, I think that's tougher and tougher. I mean, if you mean by fiction writer, you know, you include screenwriting in that, then, you know, I think that becomes a more valid question because, you know, people have always wanted to hear stories, and they tell each other stories, but for some reason they want someone who's better at it, performing it or getting the details right. So they always look to someone else other than just, you know, their friends and family to have these stories told to them. It's a way to, you know, feel good about themselves. It's a way to feel bad, but then again, it's not, you know, personal. It's not happening to them. So it's an interesting exercise for emotion. As far as novelists in today's society, that's harder. I mean, that's a harder one for me. I don't really know. It seems like a lot of novels are being written just to satisfy other writers' curiosities or interest, or it's like a bunch of people, you know, who practice the same craft, going and looking at, you know, each other's work, saying, "Oh, that's a good bookshelf. It's not the type of bookshelf I would build," or I don't know, like the lumberjack games, you know. I mean, a very small group of people go to the lumberjack games and say, who can slice that thing the fastest? Well, that's novelists now, because there aren't going to be lumberjack games forever. And I don't know if there'll be novels forever, but they definitely don't have the sort of culture-changing impact, I don't think, quite as much as they used to. And the people who try to write those, I'm immediately suspicious of. You know, when I see someone just talking about the latest tome from some new literary writer, and it's supposed to be just, you know, mind-changing and deep exploration of our society today, I'm suspicious of them immediately. It just doesn't feel right. So, I mean, I'm with John. It's entertainment. It makes people feel something for a while that distracts them from their everyday life, and if we try to make ourselves more important than that, you know, we've got to get in danger of being delusional, I think.
Sure. Let me toss it over to Johnny. Looks like you might have something to say, Mr. Shaw.
Well, no, I agree with John. I actually agree with both Neil and John. Like that, the role of fiction is you tell a bunch of lies to kind of ultimately find some kind of truth. You know, like I think if the work is, I think it's a form of entertainment, but I also think if it's empty, that I don't know. I mean, I'm not a fan of that. Like, I think what we deal with is empathy. I think you have the opportunity to get people to care about. I mean, for me, whatever's below an underdog, that's who I want to write about. Whatever, you know, I grew up in a town that you just passed by on the freeway, you know, that you would never have stopped there. And so writing about people that are ignored, people that are, you know, I just wrote something today. I was talking about something that said, like, if a politician ever calls what you do or calls your group the backbone of America, if you're a teacher or a farmer or a small business owner, you're screwed. You're all you're going to get is those words. You know, that's the surest veterans. It doesn't matter if you're the backbone of America, and those are the people that are losing their voice. Now, I don't feel it's a sense of responsibility. I just feel like it's an opportunity. That there's not a lot of writers. Poor people writing books is kind of a modern phenomenon. And if you have the opportunity of, like, I grew up on a sugar beet farm. Like, if you have the opportunity to write about that in an honest way, why the hell not? But I don't see it as a responsibility, but I do see it as an opportunity to introduce people to a different world, a different place, in a time where I think empathy is being lost. And I think I think if you can reach just a few people and get them to understand that concept of empathy, I think it can be really powerful. I mean, you see it in film and television, obviously reaches a much larger audience. It's just different mediums, saying it's still fiction.
And Mr. Weddle, how about you?
I think what John Rector was talking about with the active sense that you put into reading as opposed to sitting back and watching TV and letting that kind of wash over you kind of ties into what Neil was saying as well with exercise. And that you're you okay, Neil? And that you exercise the mind, the emotions, kind of what we're getting at, like Johnny said, with the empathetic nature of things. But I think the way that you do that, any good writer does that by not handing it over to the reader. That you kind of want the you kind of meet the reader halfway. You're empathetic with the characters, and you kind of put it out there, but you expect a lot. There's a great responsibility from the reader as well, I think, for them to come to what you were saying, and so you want to meet them there and not just hand them over how they're supposed to feel about a character. So the empathy is important, but it works both ways. The reader has to be empathetic too. You have to create that space around the characters, around the story, that allows the reader to come in and connect with things. And I get so tired of this, the spoon feeding, writing 3 books a year, 4 books a year, whatever, 18th in the series, that sort of thing. I don't like reading a whole lot of that. I would love to be able to write it because I'd like to write stuff that people wanted to read, but it's not the same sort of thing. Graham Greene had his split. He would have his serious stuff, Power and the Glory, and then he would have the entertainments. And I think there's a big split that we've kind of been hinting around at as to whether writing is entertainment or whether it's asking a little more than just entertaining, if that makes sense.
Well, it definitely does. I mean, that's kind of the point of the question. I might have been reading into Johnny's answer a little bit, but it was almost a philosophical side to what you said, Johnny, in that it's about empathy. It's about learning empathy for yourself. It's about teaching empathy or having others kind of empathize with other people. I remember something I read many years ago. David Foster Wallace, of course, is no longer with us, who basically his point was that fiction is about breaking through loneliness. It's about giving someone a sense of, oh, this person is like me in this story. There's someone like me, right?
Well, I agree with Steve. I think the reader does 90% of the work. I just also think there's a power to entertainment. I don't think fun is frivolous, and I think that's one of the things where genre work kind of gets a bad rap because it's entertaining, because it's fun. It's seen as something that doesn't have depth, and there's a lot of work that obviously doesn't have much depth, but it doesn't mean that it can't. I mean, my wife refers to our house as the house that Dick Jokes built. That I'm not afraid to go base. I'll do anything for a laugh. But the Dick Jokes are fairly complex in terms of their emotional. I got nothing.
No, it's all good. I think we have a broad range of folks here, a broad range of writers here, even though we sort of all, I think, write in the same corner of the sandbox. I'm hearing slightly different objectives, and that's what it is to write fiction. It's part of the whole thing that keeps all this running. Very cool. So again, I want to remind folks at home who might be watching either the live version or the recorded version here. Our guest, we have Johnny Shaw, who is the author of Big Maria, Anthony Neil Smith, who is the author of All the Young Warriors, Steve Weddle joining us, who is the author of Country Hardball, and John Rector, who's the author of Cold Kiss, among other books. Lots of other questions to get to here. We've got about 15 minutes left. Right, so kind of along those same lines, which for you is more easy to write? Is pacing easier, or is character development easier or harder? So when you're thinking about pacing a story, John Rector, in contrast to character development, are they equal parts? Does one come more easily to you?
I don't know if anything comes easy. I think I spend more of my time on pacing. Character development seems to come with the plot and through action. But pacing to me is sort of the linchpin. If the pacing doesn't work, readers don't keep turning the pages, and if readers don't keep turning the pages, you don't sell many books. And so, to me, there's a simplicity and a clarity factor and a pacing factor, and it all ties into putting out a story that people want to read, that they get invested in, and that they come back to. Character development, I've always found, comes along. I'm not saying you have to ignore character development, but if you can build it through the actions of your characters, and that'll reveal who they are to the reader if you can do it correctly.
And Johnny, what would you say? Character development or pacing? Which comes easier to you?
Well, I would actually say, I approach it in the exact opposite way as John. My feeling is, if the characters are fully realized, living and breathing, the reader will go along with them and care about what happens. I think pacing is less intuitive, I think, because it's part of the reader's experience. You have to be in touch with who you are as a reader and what you like about pacing, whether... I don't think it has to be something that has to be fast-paced to make you want to turn the pages. I think it has to be engaging in some way. But to me, that could be any kind. I don't sell as many books as Rector. But no, for me, it's all about the characters. It's all about those characters being living, breathing people that you give a shit about. And you can pretty much, once you do that, I think you get a lot of latitude of where you can take the story and how you pace the story.
That's one of the things that I noticed in reading Big Maria is, the first part of the story, it seems like it's about the style, it's about the character, it's about the humor, it's about the lives of these, losers, and that is what drew me in as a reader. But it's not so much about them finding, gold in the first, 100 pages or so of the story. But, once you get into the novel, at some point it's like you said, okay, there needs to be some sort of plot. What's the plot going to be? It has to sustain the novel, right?
Yeah, but like I said, that's a comic novel. I get a lot of latitude with those guys. A couple of them are despicable. And I want you to like them. And that was the challenge for me. That's what I was interested in doing, was making characters and people that I basically know, that I like, but I know they're scumbags, and kind of share that same kind of empathetic response. And I didn't really care. They're looking for gold, and I think it's about a page 150. They kind of get on their way. I have the advantage that I think the first half is funnier than the second half, even though the second half is essentially the story. That using humor allows me, what John said is, if you want the reader to keep turning the page, if it stays consistently funny, that's the way I can handle it, and they can just be sitting in a room for all I care.
And Neil, how about you? Which comes easier to you as a writer, and then as a reader, which do you prefer? Do you look for stuff that just is moving right along pacing wise, or is it character? Is it a balance of both?
I guess as a reader, I do want something in the middle. It's something where if they're too fast, this is why I guess I'm not the biggest fan of Elmore Leonard anymore, because they're just too fast. They're just sketchy and too fast, and but then I can't read just long tomes that are just pedantic and thick paragraphs of just exposition and thinking. So So I look for stuff in the middle because I try to give everything a fair chance. There are some minimalists I really like because I was trained by a minimalist, and I tend to go in that direction. But I also like some maximalists who are doing a lot of really different things and going over the top and too many words. And as far as my own writing, I was telling some students the best way to learn how to write a novel is to write it alone, and that's how you learn the rhythm. And it takes several novels. You slide into the page. You know where the action is supposed to go. You know where the character development is supposed to go. Studying film and screenwriting helps, I think, with that too. And I've been told my stuff moves really quickly and has a really good amount of pace to it. So I feel okay with that if the readers feel okay with that, because it takes 8 to 12 months to write the damn thing, so it certainly doesn't feel that fast throughout, but it feels natural. The pacing feels natural, and the character development is coming from the action, like has been said already, the scenes, and the more, I think, in terms of film, where you have to show that instead of just fill the page with words, then maybe I am thinking in terms of minutes when I'm writing scenes rather than something else more old-fashioned.
And over to Steve. What are your thoughts? Which are easier for you? Which do you start with when you're thinking about a story? Is it character? Is it about what the character is going to do? Which comes more easily to you, pacing or character?
Well, I never got out of bed in the morning wanting to write pacing. That's not what drives me. I want to write characters. They got to do something, but I'm more interested in the people in the books. I mean, we call them characters, but if you do it well, they're as close to people as we can come. And I'm more interested in what drives them, what's inside them, what they're doing, than I am thinking about building tension and that sort of thing. I think if you're true to the story, and if you have something that is worth telling, that's going to be inherent in it. And then for me at least, when I go back and I'm working on it, editing it, sculpting it down, and things like that, I might have to tweak a little here or there or keep an eye on that. But I write for character. I don't write for pacing. That does not excite me at all.
Some great answers there, and a variety of answers. It's not all one or the other. So, folks watching at home, if you're an aspiring writer, you've got to make your own sense of what these expert novelists and writers that we have on the panel tonight, think. And ultimately, I guess it comes down to, what do you want to say? What is your voice? What is your purpose? What are the kinds of stories that you want to convey and spend time with, right? So again, our panelists tonight, we have John Rector, who is the author of The Cold Kiss, Already Gone, and Out of the Black. We have Steve Weddle, who is the author of Country Hardball. We also have Anthony Neal Smith, who is the author of All the Young Warriors, and Johnny Shaw, who is the author of Big Maria, among other books. So, film adaptations. Let's talk a little bit about film adaptations. And I'll toss this over to John Rector. I remember chatting with you at Left Coast Crime this past year in Colorado Springs, your hometown, about some of the successful film adaptations of Stephen King's work. For you, what makes for a successful film adaptation? What are the ingredients? Is it something that a novelist can even control? I know you've talked a lot about getting something made of yours as a film, right?
Yeah, I don't know that a novelist can really control it, unless it's a smaller project that they're directly involved in. I've always sort of taken the James M. Cain approach to any of the options that I've had, where it's just, I want nothing to do with it. Let them do their thing. I know nothing about making movies. I don't want to know anything about making movies. I'd love to see them made into movies, but that's a different art form, and it's one I'm not familiar with in the slightest. So I'd rather just be over here in the corner doing the books and let somebody else take it and do a film.
And yet, at the same time, you write very. I mean, the way my perception of your writing is it's very it's like cinema. I mean, it moves from one scene to the next. There's not a lot of internal monologue, if any. It's very spare, descriptive, vividly written scenes with a lot of dialogue, right? Which would make for a pretty good base for a film adaptation, right?
Yeah. I mean, I love movies. I've seen enough of them, and a lot of the stuff I do with novels is based on a screenplay structure. But I still think there's a pretty wide gulf between what I know about filmmaking and what it actually takes. And I wouldn't want to be one of those kind of writers who, is trying to have my fingers in all the pies and, bugging people who know what they're doing.
Let's toss it over to Johnny, since his background is in screenwriting, right? So, what makes for a successful adaptation of a story or a novel to film?
For me, like anything, and this is probably just my taste. It comes back to character. A lot of novels that you read that you might describe as cinematic, because they move and because they have that pace. They might even read like movies. They don't necessarily adapt well, because that's actually the thing that film can add to anything. You can take anything, and film knows how to make that pace. It knows how to insert that kind of structure into it to tell that story. But if you have something that has strong characters and a decent premise, obviously, but that you can see the film adaptations that work. Obviously, novella is what you want. It's way easier. It's a way more direct adaptation without having to cut too much. I'm turning in another draft of my. I'm working dub season's option. I'm writing the screenplay, and if I left everything in, it'd be 5 hours long. So it's about trying to figure out what the kind of core of the story is, or and it really does. It's something I've been thinking about a lot over the last 6 months. And it really is the characters that make it translate into film, not just the single elements or even the pacing of the book. It's you look for what the core of the story is. Like some of those Stephen King screenplay adaptations, something like Dead Zone, which is a very, very long book, but a great film adaptation, but it obviously can't do the whole thing. You find what the core of that story is, and then. But I would say it was a fairly direct adaptation, even though there's a lot not in it. But it really is about the characters.
Yours is really interesting. So you're writing the screenplay for Dove Season. And as you said a minute ago, Johnny, you really approach fiction writing, the novel writing anyways, and the short story writing perhaps as well, from a character perspective. It seems like to me writing a screenplay is so visual, and there's so much that you have to convey through the visual image, right? How is the process different for you when you've got these characters that you've lived with for a half a decade or more, and then you're having to think about, well, how do you translate this into something that an audience sitting in a theater might watch?
I would say this: film is visual. Screenwriting really isn't. You think in terms of visuals, but you can write "they fight," and then you're done. Like, you just walk away because some fight choreographer is going to come along and they're going to take care of that. You could say a desert landscape. In fiction, you actually have to describe. You have to make people see the thing, and it's kind of this real-time experience. You can't just write "they fight" and then chapter 2. That you're writing. It's not just a blueprint. There is some prosody to it. There is some writing you have to do. But for the most part, you're giving the scene shape. It's collaborative. You have to have a lot of faith in actors, but you're going to get the benefit of performance, which you don't get in fiction. You have to mimic performance in fiction and and let the reader actually do that. And that's a lot of faith in the reader.
Do you think more about pacing with the screenplay? Do you think, what's the sort of thing that they teach in Sid Field's book? By page 10, there needs to be something that has moved the story along.
That's all. There's a three. I was taught Poetics of Aristotle, which is Sid Field, I mean, Aristotle just stole Field's stuff. It's ridiculous. There's a dramatic structure. There's a 3-act structure. But pretty soon you should be at the place from a writer's point of view where you can kind of play with it. You kind of want to learn it and forget it. It's like most rules of writing, which are all horseshit, that it's usually just something you tell someone who's starting out so they don't make an ass out of themselves. But pretty soon you got to play with all that stuff. You know, you as you develop tools, good work is not only deliberate but it's ambitious. I mean, that's why I can't write 3 novels a year, because that would be my ambition. We used to say that when I was in film school, we used to say there's a difference between a filmmaker and a footage maker, because there would be these guys that would shoot shots of leaves and then trees and then somebody running a rainy sidewalk. They just cut it all together and call it a movie. And yeah, I can write a bunch. I hate people that put their word count up. It just drives me bananas. Because all of my favorite writers, you know, it's based on quantity and how fast they wrote. That's what I really admire in an author. That I get the pride in that, but come on, there's got to be care as well. And
that's a great answer. So Neil, how about you? You've got this film adaptation coming together as an independent film, right? For Hog Dog, and tell us a little bit about that. You know, what's the big news there, and then what do you think makes for a successful film adaptation?
Hog Dogging came about because I befriended Paul Van Stotzel on the internet, and he liked my work, and we liked each other's style, and just took a chance one day and said, I've got the third Lafitte book coming out, Baddest Ass, and what if I asked you to make a trailer for it with no money, and I don't want text on a screen, because most book trailers suck. And I said, what would you do? And he said, I think I'll do it. And so I sent him a couple of pages of conversation, turned it into a script, and he messed around with it, and he made the thing for free in one night, and I thought it looked great. I thought it was a lot of fun. And then he started asking about possibilities of optioning the Lafitte books, especially Hog Dog and maybe Baddest Ass. And he hooked up with the Pounding Heart multimedia producers who were giving him, some backing, and that's what he wanted. He wanted Hog Dogging as his next project, and so as I usually do with movie people, don't believe anything they say until, there's a contract or something, real out there, because I've had my close calls, and I've had a couple of options, and these guys show up. Well, they're Minnesotans. He's got a good track record. He's done some good stuff, and his excitement about it, made me want to give these guys a chance rather than just keep holding out for possible Hollywood stuff and options one day. So money-wise, not great as far as compared to the huge amount you hear about. But I think the excitement behind it and what these guys are doing make it more exciting for me. As far as a film adaptation, this is where it gets more difficult. I have a complicated relationship with film. I don't like most movies I see. I don't like most movies that people tell me I should like, and I much prefer TV. And for me, the experience I would want seeing an adaptation of a book that I like would be something different than the experience I had in my head when I was reading the book. Because if it's too similar, or I'm just sitting there counting how many ways it's different or the same, then what point is that? That's not storytelling. That's not involvement or engagement. It's just, someone told me this story one way once, and now I want to hear it again from someone else. So I want it to be a different experience. I don't want it to be too much the same, and I don't want it to be, shitty either and just sort of tossed together lowest common denominator stuff. I'm the guy who kind of cross my fingers in that last Harry Potter movie that maybe Voldemort wins, maybe, because who knows, the movie's different than the books. So I would not write my own books adaptations. I would not be able to do that, and I told Paul, that they can have at it. I didn't want to have too much say in it, just like John said. I want them to do it. But then again, I just watched the story of film on Netflix and just fascinated with it. And I teach screenwriting courses, and I've written a couple with Victor Gischler that are either mostly continuously being optioned by somebody. And I do have some stories I would like to tell as screenplays and just see if some indie filmmakers would be interested. But it's still a complicated relationship. I kind of think writing the screenplay is, for me, more of a challenge than it is something I enjoy doing, like writing novels. And yet I want the novels to be more cinematic, at least in the way, I don't know, I see them as scenes in my head, and I don't want them to feel conventional with the language. So I'm just caught in this weird space. I think a lot of us are between movies and the written word, because they both have a real strong impact on us, and it's confusing sometimes.
Let's toss it over to Steve. We are coming down to our last few minutes here, but Steve, so in your experience, the movies that you like, adaptations that you've seen that you thought were really remarkable, what seems to be the ingredients that make for a good adaptation of a story or novel?
Well, as with everything, pacing is the most important. I think the Thin Man movies, the first one, part of the second one, were really good. Nice adaptations. Big Sleep was nice. I'm not a big fan of movies. I like them a lot more before I learned how to read. And I'd rather read a story than have it, shoved down my throat. But I think that like with everything, I get into the characters and the dialogue. So Big Sleep, Maltese Falcon, those sorts of things. Thin Man, I don't think, after Big Sleep, there probably weren't a whole lot of good movies made.
Fair enough. I might disagree. I think there have been a few decent movies made since The Big Sleep, which is a phenomenal.
After Edison's Frankenstein, they were just all fluff after that,
Well, for folks watching at home, we're down to our last couple minutes here. The authors tonight, we had Johnny Shaw, who is the author of Big Maria, Anthony Neil Smith, who is the author of All the Young Warriors, Steve Weddle, who has just released Country Hardball, which is available in bookstores everywhere. Check it out. And John Rector, who, he's sold so many books, we shouldn't even be plugging his books on here probably, but he's done phenomenally well, and we all love his work. The Cold Kiss is phenomenal, so pick it up if you haven't read it. Already Gone, and also Out of the Black, which has just been released recently as well. So, sort of the canned final question, what are you working on currently, and where do you see yourself as a writer in 5 years? And I'll start with let's start with John Rector for that.
Again, I'm working on 2 different books right now. I'm working on one called Broken. That's sort of a psycho type of book, and hopefully that'll be out soon. And I've got a novella coming out in the spring, and in 5 years, I guess I just hope I'm still around.
Neil Smith, how about you? What are you working on currently, and where do you see yourself in about 5 years as a writer?
I'm working on a book, and I don't want to tell anybody what it is. Just don't. And that's just for spite. And in 5 years, I expect to have just blown all of the goodwill I have with my fans, and we'll just have about 4 people who are not here, by the way, in this room right now. Still reading me, but I would still probably write novels for those 4 people if they wanted me to.
And Mr. Weddle, how about you? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are you currently working on?
Currently, I'm working on a biography of novelist Dave White, and I have to travel up to New Jersey here in the next weekend. I have an interview with some people at Rutgers University, which is a school there, talking about the sports department. And
Put on pants.
I have the slightest idea where I'll be in 5 years. I hope I have that book finished by then.
The Dave White memoir autobiography.
Yeah, I'm open to titles, by the way. Anybody on Twitter want to shoot me over a title for the Dave White bio? I'm working on that. So
You are definitely doing that for the money. We know it's going to be a phenomenal New York Times bestseller, a Washington bestseller. So best of luck with that. Johnny Shaw, how about you? What are you working on currently? Where do you see yourself in a few years as a writer?
I'm working on both a standalone novel. I don't really know what it's about yet. Just it's called No Accounts. Yeah, it's really early. That's about all I can say about that. And I'm doing some stuff for Blood and Tacos. We're going to start publishing novellas, and so I'm going to be writing this novella called Oaxacalypse, which features my character Chingon, the world's deadliest Mexican. It's satire.
That sounds awesome. Well, for all of us here at Book Chatter, again, our authors tonight we had, I should probably do a video here, we go, we had John Rector, who's the author of The Cold Kiss, Already Gone, and Out of Black. Steve Weddle, who's the author of Country Hardball. Anthony Neal Smith, who is the author of All the Young Warriors, and Johnny Shaw, who is the author of Big Maria. I want to thank our panelists first and foremost for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us here on Book Chatter, episode number 62. Thank you, guys. I want to thank the audience at home who's watching. Go check out their books. If you're not familiar with them, they are on Amazon and at bookstores everywhere, so check them out. All right, guys, have a great weekend. Thank you for joining us here on Book Chatter.
Thanks, Stacy.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.